This is the final presentation for the morning session. It's my pleasure to give the floor to Professor Tony Watts to give us, a deeper understanding of the career education model. Okay, please, Professor Watts.
Okay, thank you very much, Lachezar, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can I add my congratulations to those from Helmut and Raimo, to the organizers of the conference. I think it's very inspiring that this conference, so many people have come, so many people from Bulgaria, but also from many other countries to address this topic. So I think that it's very, very exciting. Also, I would like to add my congratulations to those that Helmut made on the way the conference was started, the dance. I thought it was beautiful, moving, and passed some very important messages. That message about the importance of allowing space for young people to articulate their dreams, but also providing some ladders and supports to them, and the risks of doing so and the problems of doing it, but the importance of doing so, is really what this is about. It also links with Helmut's end, which I thought was also brilliant, that if we are going to convert our vision and our dreams into reality, they've got to be converted into action. Otherwise, they're merely daydreaming, was the word that Helmut used. And this is, again, exactly the message in terms of career education. It's helping young people to articulate their dreams, but to find ways of converting them into action in a real world which is not easy, which is very difficult, becoming more difficult in many ways. The economic crisis is causing problems for all of us. How, with all of that uncertainty, do we help young people to get some sense of who they want to become and to create a world which is better, including a vibrant economy, but also a healthy society? And these are incredibly complex things, but that is the essence of what we're working at here. The other message I took from it was the importance of recognizing that learning operates not only through people talking and using words and speaking to large groups, which is what we're doing at this moment, and of course happens a lot in schools, but it works in other ways as well, and learning is affective as well as cognitive. It's about feelings as well as thoughts, and we have to find space for that. And the learning and teaching methods we use need to work with all of that. And that's a challenge for career education, because there are lots of words, and there are lots of concepts and lots of information, not least about the complexity of the real world, but we have to find the spaces for articulating the feelings as well and working at that level. And therefore, the methods we use have to be very creative if they're going to really work. So I thought in both of those ways, I thought it was a very inspiring start. I am going to talk conceptually, and I'm going to try and draw off a lot of the things that Raimo and Helmut have said, including the examples that Helmut gave us, which were very interesting, I think, from a lot of different countries. And I want to put that in some kind of conceptual framework. So I am going to talk quite a lot. I am very conscious that English is my first language, but for probably all of you, it is at best your second language, maybe your third language. And I have asked Lachezar if I talk too fast to wave to me, because I can very easily talk too fast. But also, I think it's important we have some space for reflection. I'm going to do two things. At the halfway through what I say, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to ask you just to form groups of three, just turn your chair, and just for 2 minutes, just talk about what you have heard so far which resonates with you, and to start to think about what are the kinds of questions you're beginning to ask. And I'll take 2 questions then, only 2, or comments. They could be questions or comments. And then at the end, I will do the same to allow you 2 more minutes, and to ask you perhaps to come up with a question. We won't perhaps be able to take all of them, which may be to me, but also might be to Raimo or Helmut. And that will be the second part of this session. So that's the plan, so that we have a chance to hear your views and your thoughts, and for you to reflect a little bit on what you've heard so far. Because you're hearing a lot of words in a rather strange language. So that's the plan. Now I have to find... So I'm going to talk about the rationale, why we're talking about career education and career management skills, a bit about its content, what it is, a bit about the delivery methods, how it can be actually implemented, and a bit about success factors, which are some of the issues that need to be addressed. That's the structure. And let's go straight into the rationale. Helmut talked about the paradigm shift in career guidance, but I think it is linked to a paradigm shift in the concept of career itself, what we mean by the word career, which of course translates in different ways in different languages. So I'm using the English term, recognizing that it doesn't always translate very easily in some other countries. But we have, I think, seen a paradigm shift in the concept of career. I use the word career quake, which is a kind of way of thinking about that it's a seismic shift in the way in which we think about career. Because the old concept in English was that a career was about some kind of progression up an ordered hierarchy, a bit like a ladder. You go up a ladder within some organization or profession. That was what, if people, you say, what do you mean by career? That has been the dominant kind of idea, which is why that ladder this morning had another meaning. So the idea is that you choose your ladder, and that's what career choice is, and then you go up it. And that model was never true for many people, and it's becoming less and less true. So it was about people choosing a career, entering it and simply letting it kind of unfold in an orderly way. It was a very bureaucratic concept. For those who studied sociology, it was a very Weberian concept. And it was an elitist concept. Some people had careers, many people only had jobs, and some people didn't have jobs. So it applied to the few, not to the many. But now, in the post-industrial era, the era of the knowledge society, that concept has been fragmenting in a major, major way. The pace of change, which we all experience in our lives, driven significantly by technology and by globalization, means that all organizations are constantly having to change all the time. They're therefore less willing to make these long-term commitments to individuals, and where they do so, it has to be in exchange for flexibility in terms of roles and tasks, so that as the organization changes, the people change in terms of the skill sets they require, and so on. That is now the deal. And that is linked to the concept of flexicurity, which Raimo mentioned, which is a political term used very widely in Europe at the moment, and a controversial term. It is politically controversial. But the idea behind it is that what we've got to try to do is to reshape our social security and our active labor market measures to reconcile two things: flexibility for employers, but some kind of security for individuals. How do we do that? And all of the challenges which are taking place to our pension systems and all these other things are linked with that change. And the underlying principle is that, again, a controversial notion, that security, insofar as we can find it, now lies not in employment, because for many people that isn't there anymore. There's no security of employment. The closest we can get to it is employability. If we can maintain and continue to develop our employability, then there is every chance that we can secure work which will enable us to survive, but also to contribute to the societies and economies of which we're part. So, because individuals who want to maintain their employability have to be willing to regularly learn new skills. And that is even more true at a time of economic crisis, which we're all experiencing at the moment. We're in the middle of this very confusing period when, in many ways, all these things are even more true than they have been. And that, I think, does transform the concept of career. My own definition now is that it's not about that progression up an ordered hierarchy any longer. It's about the individual's lifelong progression in learning and in work. And the choice of words there is important. It's learning because it's not just education, it's also training, and it's informal learning, because many of us learn informally as well as formally. It's work because it's not just employment, important as that is, it's also self-employment, and it's all the other forms of work we all engage in our communities and our households. There are other forms of work which are very, very important. But it's about helping individuals to develop the skills which will enable them to develop their work throughout their lives. So it's the progression in learning and work. So if that is the definition, the notion is that careers are no longer chosen. It's not choosing your ladder anymore. They are constructed through a whole series of decisions we all make, and we are still making. All of us are still making these decisions throughout our lives. That is how careers are made. It's about construction. And in that sense, in principle, that definition is no longer an elitist definition. It is in principle open to everybody. And the issue is whether we can make it meaningful for everybody. And that's the policy challenge, is to make it something which is available to all citizens, so that all citizens can develop a career in that sense whereby they can develop themselves in a way which enables them to do work which will contribute to their societies, but on an ongoing basis, developing all of that throughout their lives. Now, that is the challenge, and it's enormously demanding, but that is why what we're talking about here is so important. And arguably, the key task for public policy is to make sense of this and to implement it as something which is meaningful for everybody, for all citizens. That's the challenge to public policy. And that is why, as Helmut and Raimo were articulating, that's why lifelong guidance, which is the Euro term which is used, has become a policy issue. Not just in Europe, but also across the world. It's much more strongly there, and I think it is linked to that paradigm shift. But the principle which lies behind it is that this is not just a private good, it is a public good. It matters in terms of policy, because governments can't sort the labour market, but what they can do is to do things which activate it, and this is one of those things. And it is of benefit not just the individuals who receive whatever the programs develop, it is of wider public benefit as well. And those public policy goals fall into three broad areas. When we've done these analyses, I worked at OECD, we did a review of 14 countries, then it was extended through CEDEFOP and the European Training Foundation, and Helmut's been very actively involved in a lot of these, as has RIMO, and we've now done these kinds of reviews in, actually it's 55 countries, including I think all the countries represented here probably. And we've looked at the policy goals underpinning them, and they fall into three broad clusters. First are to do with learning, how to improve the efficiency of the education and training system, to make it work better, and to link it to the labour market more effectively, which is always a problem in all our countries. But in principle, if individuals make decisions about what they are going to learn in a well-informed and well-thought-through way, linked to their interests, their capacities and their aspirations, then the huge amounts of money which all of our countries invest in our education and training systems are likely to be used much more effectively. I mean, it's a simple proposition, but it absolutely must make sense. Secondly, labour market goals, improving the match between supply and demand, and managing adjustments to change, recognizing governments can't sort that. In the end, employers and individuals have to sort that. If people find jobs which utilize their potential and meet their own goals and dreams and aspirations, they're likely to be much more motivated and therefore to be much more effective in terms of their performance. Again, it makes total sense. And the third set is to do with social equity, which includes supporting equal opportunities and promoting social inclusion. Lifelong guidance services can raise the aspirations of disadvantaged groups and support them in gaining access to opportunities that might otherwise have been denied to them. And that's a very important rationale, because people who come from affluent, wealthy backgrounds have a lot of resources they can use, but people from disadvantaged backgrounds do not. And in a way, all the things we're talking about here are even more important for them, because without those things, they haven't got the supports they need to enable them to realize their aspirations. Now, those goals, I think, have been around for some time, but in the wake of this career quake that I've talked about, they're now being reframed to support policies related to lifelong learning and sustained employability in terms of public policy. And arguably, lifelong guidance is absolutely crucial to the success of lifelong learning policies. If you look at the policy documents on lifelong learning and sustained employability, they almost always include a reference to the fact that these policies have to be significantly driven by individuals. Initial education you can design as a system. We can force children to go into schools and force them to learn what we teach them. Well, we can think that's what we do. But there is a degree in which we're actually controlling that. Lifelong learning cannot possibly be like that. It's much more diffuse, and to work, it has to be driven very significantly by individuals. It is the individual who provides the impetus, the coherence, and the continuity in terms of that learning. So individuals have to be at the heart of these policies, which is why providing support to individuals to articulate what they want and to find ways of achieving it is absolutely crucial, which is why lifelong guidance is at the heart of these policies. So the result of all this is that countries increasingly recognize the need to expand access to lifelong guidance services and programs so they're available not just to selected groups at particular points, which is where they have been. If you look at the services in the past, they've been mainly for young people on exit from the education system as a kind of tweak to move them into the labour market, and then sometimes for unemployed people, where people have dropped out of the labour market to get them back into the labour market. That's where many services and programs have been concentrated. Those are still very important, But the notion is now we've got to try to expand access so that it is genuinely lifelong. And that's a huge challenge, because if the expanded access was going to be based on the old model of career guidance, it's very costly, as Helmut has suggested. The old model was, in a way, a medical model. The notion was a counsellor worked with an individual, administered some tests, measured them, diagnosed them, and then issued a prescription, which is what they should do. You've done all these tests, I think you should become a this, that, or the other. That was the model. And it was expensive, but it was also directive. The work was done by the counsellor. The patient received the prescription and either paid attention to it or didn't. Either, took the medicine or didn't take the medicine. But that was the model. It was a bit of a medical model in many ways. Now, the model is based on learning, with the individual at the center. It's about how we help individuals to develop the skills to manage their career in terms of their progression in learning and work throughout their lives. How do we actually do that? And it's a very different model. Its implications are very different. The work now has to be done by the individual. The counsellor, or perhaps increasingly the teacher, because it is a learning process, is there to support them in that process. So I think there's two arguments here, and I think it's important to distinguish them. One is the cost argument. Helmut mentioned that it's a cost-effective solution. And it is because the evidence that's been done, there have been a lot of studies done, the meta-analyses show very clearly that from the viewpoint of the individual's time, one-to-one counselling is the most effective. But from the viewpoint of the counsellor's time, the most cost-effective is group work and so on, because one person counsellor is working with a lot of people over a period of time, but it is a more cost-effective solution. So the evidence is clear, and there is still an important role for individual counselling. I'm not saying that in the end it's a very individual business. These are not mutually exclusive. But it's about moving the dominant paradigm, because we have issues about the costs and what we're trying to achieve. But it's not just about costs, it's also about what we are trying to achieve. And it is that move from this medical prescriptive approach to a learning approach which is based on empowering individuals to find the means of developing their careers throughout their lives. One of those skills being to know where they can continue to get help when they need it. But it's about the individual being at the heart of all of that process. So those are the two arguments, and I think it's very important that we recognize and distinguish between them. So I want to say a little bit about content. And I'm going to use the DOTS model, because it's been around a long time, which Bill Law and I developed it a long time ago, but it's still, I think, quite a useful framework, because in terms of what it is we're talking about here. There are different frameworks, but I think actually they all cover some of the same kind of ground. The DOTS framework is about these four areas. It's about self-awareness. It's about who am I and who do I want to become? And that's in terms of my abilities, my skills, my interests, my values, what I think is important, my personality, my aspirations, my dreams. Very complex, delicate, difficult but important work where you can use all sorts of tools to encourage young people to articulate a greater sense of who they are and who they want to become. Secondly, opportunity awareness, because the self has to be realized in terms of their career in a real world and has to be based on understanding of that real world. So how do we encourage young people to a greater understanding of the world of work, which goes beyond just knowing the bits they see, the teachers, the people they see on the media who are role models, who kind of excite them in whatever ways, relations, whatever it may be. How do we extend their awareness of this incredibly complex and rich and varied world of work? The different kinds of work there are, the different kinds of demands they make, the different kinds of opportunities they offer. How do we extend that? And that is complex. We can do things, there's lots of things we can do in the classroom, but in the end we probably have to get out of the classroom, or we have to bring people into the classroom from the real world of work. So that is demanding. Then thirdly, there is decision learning. How do we actually make decisions? How do we use information and convert it into action? How do we manage the balancing of the desirability of what we want to do against the probability of being able to achieve those things? How do we actually manage all of that? How do we manage the role that this is not just a cognitive process? Feelings matter here when people make decisions. How do we make decisions in our lives? Many of us do it by intuition, not by using a lot of information in a very cognitive way, but by intuition. How do we trust our feelings? How can we test out our feelings? So that whole area of decision learning is about decision making in relation to career, but it links with decision making in the rest of our lives. And then fourthly, there is transition learning. How do we help people to implement their decisions and convert them into action? Very concrete things. How do we help young people to present themselves effectively in their curriculum vitae, in terms of selection interviews? How do we train them to be able to do that effectively, but also how do we help to prepare for the transitions which all these things involve? So these are complex areas, but I think the career management skills, I think, cover those four, I would suggest cover those four broad areas. There are, say, lots of other ones that Helmut mentioned the Canadian blueprint, which has been a very influential model. That divides into these three areas, but I would say personal management has a lot to do with self-awareness. Learning and work exploration has a lot to do with opportunity awareness. Life work building has a lot to do with decision learning and transition learning. So I think they're covering a lot of the same ground, but reshaping them in different ways. And this has been, the interesting thing about the blueprint is that it's a blueprint for learning throughout life, not only in schools. It's about how we continue to develop our career management skills throughout our lives. Within schools, I just thought it was perhaps important to link what we're talking about here to some other areas to which they are often linked and with which they sometimes get confused. I've tried to say that what we're talking about career management skills is about the skills of managing the decisions and transitions which are concerned with constructing your career. Within schools, they're often built into broader programs to do with personal and social education, which includes things like relationships, health, sex, drugs, things of that kind, life skills. And there's value in merging it into those programs. I mean, the Turkish program, the guidance curriculum, would cover all of those broad areas. The risk is that the career education bit can be a bit marginalized. Teachers are often more interested in and feel more competent to talk about some of the other areas they do about career. Many teachers don't feel they know much about the labour market. So it can be at risk of being marginalized, so we have to be careful about that. But that is one kind of approach. But those links, I would say, it can be linked with all of that, but it needs to be distinguished from it. It also can get linked to employability skills, which are the generic skills which apply to many areas of work: teamwork, digital competence, communication skills, self-presentation skills. Those are all generic employability skills, many of them acquired through good teaching and learning methods rather than through content in the curriculum. If you have teaching and learning methods which encourage young people to work in teams, they will learn about teamwork. If you always just speak to them, they're not going to, you can talk to them forever about teamwork, but they won't learn it unless they do it. So it's the teaching and learning. So again, there is a link, but I would say it's a distinct, as a separate issue, but they can be brought together, but we shouldn't get confused. And then there is also the potential confusion with VET, vocational education and training, which is about preparation for entry into a particular occupation or group of occupations. That is what I would say. Ah, right. That's what I say VET is. So in many ways, I would see career education in two relationships to VET. One is it needs to precede VET, because when people enter a particular VET program, they have made a huge choice, which is a career choice, actually. So there needs to be a career education program before to help them to make sure that choice is made in an informed way. But secondly, and this is a slightly subtle point, I would argue that career education can be an important part of a VET program, which is about helping young people in the program understand that they can apply what they're learning in a broader area of work than they may think they can. So to learn about the areas of work for which the program is preparing them, and to recognize the transferability of some of the things they're learning, because sometimes VET programs lead to a dead end, and there are limited opportunities, but you've still learned things which you can apply elsewhere. So maybe VET programs need to pay some attention to that broadening, and career education, I would argue, can help a VET program to do that. But you will see I am distinguishing it from VET itself. So I'm saying it needs to precede VET and can be part of a VET program, but it is not the same as VET. So I'm trying to distinguish between those different concepts. And just before we do our first break, some brief comments about delivery models. We've already heard some comments about this from Helmut, but I would say there are 4 broad ways in which career education can be delivered. One is as a standalone program. You can have a career education program as part of the curriculum, and I think the examples that Helmut gave from Kosovo, from Albania, from Finland, and to some extent from Estonia, all sounded to me as though they were standalone programs. Or, secondly, they can be subsumed within something wider, which might be personal and social education, or might be a guidance curriculum, as in Turkey, for example. So it's part of something which covers other elements as well. So I would call that the subsumed model. Or it can be infused across the curriculum, as it has also been in Estonia, but other countries have tried that, Czech Republic, Sweden. Or it can be outside the curriculum altogether, often with a day or two which was done on an intensive basis, but outside the curriculum. And many countries have more than one of those models. But each of them does have pros and cons. The infusion model, the idea of spreading this across the curriculum, which is linked with the whole school concept, as Helmut says, in many ways is the ideal. If that was really true, it would probably be the strongest model, because the whole school would understand this as an area to which it should be attending and would make it work. But it is very, very difficult to implement effectively, partly because there are difficulties in persuading subject teachers teaching their mathematics or their physics or their languages or whatever it may be to take advantage of the opportunities it provides for career exploration. There are opportunities in all subjects, actually, but it's not always easy, and that's because of what educational theorists call recognition rules, which are the rules which determine where the teachers and pupils think this is a legitimate discourse within the classroom, what they think is happening within the classroom. And what many of them think is happening is that we are learning something in order to reproduce it in an examination to get a credential which we can then use in the marketplace. So that's the notion of what we're doing. We come in, we will listen to teachers, we'll take lots of notes because we know we've then got to use that, regurgitate it in some way, and so it's an instrumental benefit, an extrinsic benefit. And something which isn't doing that, what's that about? It's not what we're here for at all. It's a waste of time. We're wasting our time. And it's not, it's not part of the deal. So that is a challenge, is breaking out of the narrowness of that kind of deal in order to be effective. The other problem with the infusion model is that it can be very patchy, disconnected, and not visible to the students. Teachers can be doing things, but whether students can actually bring these things together in any kind of effective way is, I think, questionable. But it sounds attractive because in a way you don't have to do anything. You just say, we're just going to infuse it across the curriculum. Easy, all done. And we have one or two workshops about it and then we forget about it and assume it's happening. And that is a real risk. And in one of the country studies we did at the OECD, I think it actually was the Norwegian study, we did say that actually this concept of the infusion model, while it is a high aspiration, can be a thin veil hiding a bare cupboard. So that's the challenge. Programs outside the curriculum, the French have tended to do this. They have a rather narrow view of the curriculum, but they do things outside it, and career education has tended to be done outside the curriculum, often over a day or two or even longer with a kind of workshop approach. And that has benefits because the recognition rules are dropped. Teachers and pupils know there's something different going on here, and I engage with this in a different way. So it does have benefits, but because it's outside the curriculum, it can be a bit marginalized. It tends to be a bit spasmodic. It happens now and then is forgotten about. So as with all these things, there are benefits but also risks. Some countries have tried to build blocks of time within the curriculum so that in a way you get some of that benefits of reshaping the expectations and also providing space for more active forms of learning, for workshops. In my country, for example, there's been a lot of interest in what are called compelling learning experiences based on concentrated blocks of time, bringing different subjects together as a way of enriching those subjects. So it's done within the curriculum, but taking advantage of breaking the 40-minute period block. So again, that's a way in which these things can be brought together. But I think there is a strong case for some kind of distinctive provision, either on a standalone basis or subsumed basis, which is recognizably about career education, but can be enriched by infusion across the curriculum and enriched by these extracurricular experiences. So I think, in a way, a lot of it's about a mixed model. Helmut referred to the notion of whether it should be optional or compulsory. If it's an elective course, people can choose it if they wish, but not if they don't. Does that make sense? What are we doing there? Does it mean that it's only for students who we can't think of anything else to teach them and we put them on some kind of careers bit? Or why will some choose, not others? Because this is something which is really important for everybody, and everybody should be able to make sense of it. So the notion of having it an elective, I think, is a questionable one. There is also merit in bringing these bits together, whatever model you choose, with the career portfolio. Helmut mentioned the career portfolio, I think, in the case of Singapore, maybe one or two other countries as well, but quite a number of countries have adopted this notion of a portfolio, which is where pupils can collect materials which are relevant to their career, but bring those bits together. And that can work across the curriculum. It can be used in all sorts of flexible ways. But it does actually epitomize, in a very concrete way, the notion that the learner is at the heart of what we're trying to achieve here. And the learner, in the end, owns all the things that we're doing. And actually, it can be the basis on which they can have a means through which to develop their curriculum vitae for the reference, for the future, but also to have it as a place where they record the various things which are relevant to developing their career. And I think that's a very rich way. And of course, it can be done on the web now, and you can develop it in a way which is transferable across different sectors. So I think that notion of where the e-portfolio sits in relation to career education is a really important issue. I'm going to pause now. I've talked for quite a long time, and there's some more things I want to say, but I just want to encourage you just for 2 minutes, only 2 minutes, just to turn towards each other, perhaps preferably in threes, but in twos if it's more easy, and just to reflect on what you've heard so far, what it's meant to you, and if you want to start shaping a question, that would be helpful. So 2 minutes.